It would be a Pyrrhic victory for the Chinese if the 7 million people in Hong Kong had small arms. But that is the debate, quite frankly, that the Democrats are going for on gun control. And we're going to take a look at gun control and, surprise, surprise, SSRIs and those antidepressant drugs back at the center of the shooting again. This is the story that nobody, including President Trump, will talk about. And yet, as we look at the red flag gun laws designed to take away our due process as well as our firearms, confiscate them, just like they want to confiscate the wealth. Not just keep you from acquiring them, but confiscate the ones that are already out there. How are they going to do it? Oh, with a massive psychiatric bureaucracy. Where did we get the SSRIs? That was from the psychiatrists. It's just, we are spiraling down. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome on this Monday, August the 19th, year of our Lord 2019. Today we're going to contrast two different protests, violence at each of these. We're told that it is a clash in Portland between right-wing fascists and the anti-fascists. And we're told, if you listen to mainstream media, they will tell you that the violence is really due to the right wing, not to the Antifa, but actually the people on site tell a different story, and we've got video to prove it. This is why they want to control everything that you see and hear. They want to control the narrative. If you listen to CNN, ABC, NBC, the Antifa people are simply defending their area and doing it by attacking, circling and attacking people who are isolated, sucker punching them. In Hong Kong, it's a different story. They really are pushing back against the fascists, who are also communists. Let's take a look first at Portland. We had Harrison Smith there covering it live, and there is a lot of video from a lot of people who are covering that live. And as it is being spun by the mainstream media, well, I'll tell you what they're saying in just a moment. Let's take a look at what actually happened there. They had a heavy police presence. The first thing is the bus that was attacked. Actually, I think I tweeted this out on my account as I saw this. So this is a bus, and there's the peaceful Antifa people defending their city by using a hammer to try to bust into a bus, spraying pepper spray into it, attacking these people as they're in a bus leaving. A big threat to them. Yeah, that's the people that are being defended by CNN, ABC, CBS, as defending their city. Defending their city. These peaceful Antifa people, as you can see there, attacking a bus. But then it gets worse than that. We've got an old man getting assaulted by Antifa. He's got his American flag ripped from his hands and thrown to the ground because, you know, America. They can't have that. There you go. Sucker punch. Come up behind people and hit them simply because they've got an American flag. You know, kind of like what they did to Andy Ngo. Blindside. He's just, I don't think Andy even had an American flag. He was simply the press because these people are anti-First Amendment. That's really all they are. They don't want anybody having a peaceful protest, which is part of the First Amendment. They don't want press there like Andy Ngo. If anybody is there, these communists, these radical communists, will attack them first. Another individual triggered, yelling, "No Trump, no KKK," because he sees a small group of people carrying U.S. flags. That's the way you trigger them, right? That's what they absolutely hate. And they're calling for more reinforcements. That's why we have an open border, because they have to escalate this civil war being created against America. The people coming here, supposedly refugees from Guatemala, El Salvador, are waving the flags of Guatemala and El Salvador. Those places that are oppressing them, right? Help, help, I'm being repressed. Shades of Monty Python. It's so incredibly absurd. While they burn American flags, just like Antifa. Yeah, they're going to join up and join the fight against America. The fifth column that is being created by the Democrats. One guy is confronted for wearing a shirt with an American flag on the sleeve. The protester is extremely offended. And then the Portland police began to hold back and let Antifa loose, as you saw in several different instances. As they pulled back, one of the instances that they had was a particular case, you had one man with a young girl, and they came after the two of them, and he's trying to hold them off. He's dressed up like a Spartan or a gladiator or something. He's got like a gladiator helmet on. You can see that. And he's got an American flag on his leg, on his pants. So, that makes him the enemy. And all these people start circling him, and he's got a young girl with him, and he's just trying to get out of the area. And finally, he finds a different direction to go and takes her, and they start chasing them. The two of them. Yeah, that's the thugs, the bullies. These people chasing a man with a girl, they have to be chased down and attacked simply because he's protesting. They cannot be allowed. And it's just absolutely amazing. Where are the police? Oh, yeah, it's the mayor really didn't want the police doing anything to help anybody there. As a matter of fact, the mayor was saying that she wanted people to stay out of the area. Why are you coming here to attack our peaceful city? The mayor says in all of this, she said, a message to anyone planning to use Portland on August the 17th to commit violence and spread hate. We don't want you here. Period after each one of those in her tweet. Unless, of course, you're Antifa. In that case, the police will stand down and let them do whatever they wish, which is what you're seeing right here. Why isn't she concerned about that? President Trump has said we're going to watch this very closely. Why is it that the Portland government does not support the First Amendment in any way, shape, or form, whether it is press that is being attacked or whether it is people who show up to peacefully redress their grievances? That's also a part of the First Amendment. It won't be long before they have Antifa attacking churches as well, because that's also a part of the First Amendment. And I'm sure that they hate that as well. So when we look at what happened there, it's amazing to see what was said on CNN. As I pointed out, they attack a bus. They attack the people inside the bus with a hammer, with gas. They also pepper spray. They also attacked a father with his young daughter, and attacking anybody when they are isolated. That's the key. Because I guess, could we call them bullies? Is that bullying? When you have a massive crowd of people attacking one or two individuals because they're isolated, and then they back off of the main group. Yeah, I think they are bullies, except they're not shut down on Twitter. Twitter leaves their accounts up as well. They shut down Proud Boys. They shut down the people who were not violent, the people who were peacefully expressing their political views. Maybe it wasn't the views of Antifa, but they're not going to allow that. And then we have on CNN this Democrat lawmaker, Deborah Haaland of New Mexico, and she calls Antifa a group of peaceful protesters. Don't believe your eyes. Believe these Democrats. Here she is on CNN.
This is on par with what the president does. He sides with the white supremacists. He sides with the white nationalists, with the domestic terrorists in our country, just as, he's incited violence against people.
Those are labels that you haven't supported, but keep going.
Portland is a progressive city. They want to ensure that they keep their city moving forward. It's not surprising that Trump would side away from the folks who are the peaceful protesters working to safeguard their city from domestic terrorism. Just not surprised at all that the president sides with the white nationalists. That's been his mode of operation since before he was elected president.
Yeah, those peaceful protesters who had weapons and helmets, the little 90-pound weaklings who attack en masse one or two individuals. They find an elderly man or they find a man with his young daughter. They attack him. Those heroes of the left, because, this is a liberal enclave here. And it's a progressive city. And progressive cities don't tolerate a diversity of opinions or a diversity of races. Remember the very first, it was one of the first rallies that President Trump had in Chicago. Might have been the very first. And as they started attacking the cars of the people who had gone to that rally in Chicago, the attackers were defended by the mainstream media. and by the politicians there in Chicago in the same way. Same justification. They know that Chicago is a liberal city. How dare them come here? Don't they know they're triggering us? That we can't constrain ourselves? That we don't tolerate a diversity of opinion? We don't tolerate free speech? And you see that reflected in the internet. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Yeah, it's back to the future, isn't it? We have communism making a comeback run. We're going back to the beginning of the 20th century. And we see communism being worshipped, fascist authoritarian tactics in Portland. And we see what people are doing in Hong Kong. We're going to get to that in just a moment. One more thing about the major news media organizations and how they have skewed and lied about what's going on in Portland. I talked about CNN, showed you the Democrat lawmakers saying, this is a progressive city. They're just, protecting themselves against these right-wing protesters. They have to protect their ideology. And since they can't defend it verbally, they have to defend it violently, right? There isn't any way that you can defend socialism. There isn't any way, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it progressive policy, socialism, communism. They're getting to the point where they are very comfortable now with socialism. They used to avoid that. It won't be long before they just admit what it is. It's simply communism. It is simply putting everything under the power of the state. It is full-on statism. And that's why, when you look at what's going on in China, everybody has been taught for the longest time that communism and fascism are polar opposites of each other. They aren't. The reason that they fed that false dichotomy to people is because they said, well, look, on the one side, the American liberals liked Stalin. They liked communism. They didn't like Hitler because Hitler was nationalist and he used racist policies. But on the other side, it's like, oh, well, we are the international and we want to bring everybody in and we want to promote women and so forth. But they both wind up in the same place. And Hitler said, we are in a better position than Stalin because he made the mistake of confiscating all the means of production. I'm leaving the people who know how to run things in charge until the very last stage. And then we'll slit their throats as well, essentially. So they're all going to wind up in the same spot. They're, mass murderers, each of them. Whatever justification they want to use to get into power, whether they use the justification of being nationalist or whether they use the justification of being internationalists, globalists. Doesn't really matter. Whether they want to talk about the brotherhood of all mankind or whether they want to talk about the supremacy of one nation and one race, it doesn't matter. In the end, all power goes to the state and everybody is suppressed by that. And so it isn't any surprise to see communist China actually being very fascist because they're really following the tactics of Hitler, merging with industry, owning the industry. And that's what we see happening. That's what the people in Hong Kong are pushing back against. But before we leave Portland, it's not just CNN. It's all the establishment corporate media that's putting out this narrative. ABC, NBC, as we have the headlines at Infowars.com, provide cover for Antifa terrorism, claim that they are, quote, counter-protesters. ABC's coverage was absolutely abysmal, with on-screen headline that suggested, quote, the right wing was responsible for the violence. No, the reality is that the right wing marched, they peacefully assembled, they redressed their grievances against the left-wing government there. And then the left-wing government said, you better not come here. We don't want you here. Pull back the police and let them attack when there are isolated pockets of people. And that's what they do. Dan Harris, Good Morning America co-anchor, said, meanwhile, violent street confrontations in Portland, Oregon. 13 people arrested, 6 injured, when more than 1,000 right-wing demonstrators and counter-protesters descended upon the area. So see, it was justified because they were there. They weren't the ones doing the violence, but it was justified because they were there. And we don't support in progressive cities, just as I said, in Chicago, it was justified for these people to key the cars and vandalize and smash the cars of people who were attending a Trump rally. How How dare President Trump come to Chicago to hold a political rally? Don't they realize that we don't tolerate that kind of thing in liberal cities, and they don't tolerate it in Portland either? And again, you know, it's this is what we see from the left, ABC, NBC, both of them doing the same thing, implying that the violence is the right wing, that they instigated it. Dan Crenshaw, Congressman Dan Crenshaw, said in Hong Kong, protesters are waving American flags, and in America, Antifa burns them. This is what he tweeted out. In Hong Kong, anti-fascists wave American flags and demand freedom and actually fight fascists because the communist government is fascist. In Portland, quote-unquote anti-fascists burn American flags, and they demand violence in the name of socialism. Portland is a sad showing of where we are today all around. And yes, obviously, we should buy Greenland. We'll talk about that later. I don't know if it's for sale. I mean, the Danish government, maybe they're playing hard to get. Maybe this is a negotiating tactic, but they're saying that Greenland is not available. We'll talk a little bit more about that. A lot of people have chimed in and said that that would be a good thing for us to do. But of course, we'll have to see if that happens or not. That's President Trump, as I said on Friday, his Greenland New Deal. But it may be a Greenland no deal if the Danish people don't want to sell it. I can't imagine that we would invade to take it in the right of conquest or whatever. But let's go to Hong Kong, where they're actually waving American flags and they're actually fighting fascism and communism, whatever you want to, authoritarian government. This last weekend, even though it was raining, they drew a crowd of more than 1.7 million people there in the rain. It's the 11th consecutive week of demonstrations, and they are demonstrating in favor of democracy, in favor of, listen to this, folks, all you red flag Trump supporters, they are protesting in favor of due process. Remember that forgotten item from our Constitution? These people take a liberty a lot more seriously than Americans do, a lot more seriously than conservatives in this country do, quite frankly. They said, if we have to break the law to exercise our constitutional rights, it means the government is exploiting our constitutional rights. See, these people really believe the Declaration of Independence, that governments are constituted to defend our God-given rights. And if the government is going to take our rights away, it is the right and the duty of the people to resist that. Now, right now, they're doing it peacefully. They said they wish they had a Second Amendment, not because they want to kill people, but because it would be a very effective deterrent. We're going to get, as we talk, we've got to take a break here. As we come back, we're going to talk about Hong Kong. We're going to talk about China. We're going to talk about how the tactics that the Chinese government is using against the pro-democracy, I would say pro-liberty. That's really the issue. It's really about liberty and due process. They're using that against them. These are the same tactics that are being used against us by our corporate global elite. Why? Because they have the same mindset, the same tools. They are allied with the Chinese communists. The Chinese communists were helped and enabled to get into power just like our Silicon Valley masters were helped and enabled to get into power by the same people. They probably came up with all this stuff at Jeffrey Epstein's pedo island. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Yeah, we had people in Hong Kong making their move for liberty. Again, the situation there was turned back officially to the Chinese mainland as the lease expired. I think it was 1999. Was that when it was? And they had 100-year lease that had been given to the British government at the point of a gun from the communist. Well, it wasn't communist then. The Chinese had turned that over as a lease. The people in Hong Kong got used to liberty. Perhaps one of the freest areas in the world was Hong Kong. Milton Friedman talked about it, used it as a shining example of freedom. You know, they had some of the protesters are saying they wanted to orchestrate a run on the Hong Kong banks on Friday. I don't think that materialized. One of the differences there is that in Hong Kong, you have the banks are actually issuing money as opposed to a real central bank just printing money. When you have private banks that are issuing currency the way it used to be in the United States before we had the Federal Reserve. They actually have to keep reserves for that. When we were there briefly, when we adopted my daughter, I was surprised to see the different Hong Kong dollars, same denomination, very different, and we have a different bank name on it. And I assume that it's still that way. And that may be why the bank run did not happen, because the people there are very committed. 1.7 million showing up in the streets to peacefully protest the fact that China is demanding that they can extradite anybody that they want. They already appoint the chief executive. They have the ability in Hong Kong, the citizens can elect people to the legislature there, but the chief executive, this Carrie Lam, who is there, is appointed by the mainland Chinese communists. And she is not stepping down, and she is not removing the bill that would allow the Chinese Communist government to extradite people. They've had many, in the last 10 years or so, many different instances where the mainland Chinese have attacked people exercising their free speech. They've destroyed newspapers. They've arrested individuals. They have attacked protesters who are protesting the Chinese Communist government, propagandizing their children through textbooks and through government schools, telling them how wonderful communism is, how horrible their family is, or how horrible their culture is, or freedom is, or Christianity is. And when you push back against that, they want you extradited. That's why these people are fighting back. And now you see these pictures of surfaced, I think it was last Friday, on the Drudge Report, the giant electric fork that Chinese military or police, whichever one you want to look at, it's kind of, the lines are really kind of blurring in both China and America between the police and the military, aren't they? And that's why I'm talking about this. We are not that far away from what is happening in China. They're just a little bit ahead of us. And so it's very important to take a look at what's going on in China, because we're looking at our future when we look at this. 8-foot poles with U-shaped prongs on the top of them being used by both police and armed forces. Why? Because there isn't any difference between the police and the military. They have militarized police, and they have the military that does police functions there. As they're preparing to enter Hong Kong, the Chinese military issued a stark warning in a bid to intimidate protesters. They said troops could meet the demonstrators in 10 minutes. And they shared photos of a queue of armored vehicles. You mean like the MRAPs that the Obama administration, the mine-resistant armored personnel carriers that the Obama administration was seeding throughout our country into small rural areas that are now being purchased still? I've got an article about this we'll talk about in just a moment when we get to the Second Amendment. We've got a small town in Iowa where they just purchased their own MRAP. I mean, the ones that Obama was putting out, they still retained ownership. The Department of Defense did. It's kind of like a white elephant. Okay, here's this MRAP. You're going to have to maintain it, which these things are incredibly expensive to maintain because they rushed to get them to Iraq. They didn't design them very well as a response to the roadside bombs that were there in our Iraq war. And as a result, they're very, very expensive to maintain. The Pentagon said, you can have these, but you're going to have to maintain them. Again, it's the whole white elephant thing. We're going back to India. If the king there wanted to make somebody really miserable, he would give them a sacred elephant and tell them that because they couldn't get rid of it, they had to feed the elephant because if they didn't support that thing properly, care for it properly, they were in big trouble, religiously and politically. And so here, our religion is national security, and they better support that white elephant of the armored personnel carrier. But now we've got a small town in Iowa that has bought their own, and they were able to do it by the money that they stole from people under civil asset forfeiture. You don't think that we're going to have this same type of thing here where you've got the military saying, we can be there in 10 minutes, and look at our armored vehicles, as Eric Swalwell would say. Yeah, and they're legit too, right? Along with our nuclear weapons, and we're not really worried about using any kind of force against our citizens because we don't really care what you think. We don't have to. Power comes out of the barrel of a gun. Sometimes it comes out of an armored personnel carrier. Amnesty International said, quote, a wide range of direct contact electric shock weapons including electric shock stun guns, stun batons, stun shields, have been developed, traded, and employed by police and security forces throughout the world. This isn't something that just the Chinese communists are doing, right? It's not limited to them. This is our future as well. I don't know if Americans have it in them to stand up to tyranny anymore. These people are taken to the streets with just umbrellas in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, they're also saying we want to get the Catholics and other Christians to cooperate with each other. They said it's a good chance for us to become united. Asia News, the official press agency of the Pontifical Institute for Foreign Missions, said that Chinese government has engaged its propaganda machine against the Hong Kong protesters. Well, they fabricated false reports, just like we see in American mainstream media. Isn't that an interesting parallel there? We have people who begin a meeting with prayer. That only makes them more angry when they see people that are conservative praying. We got to get these people out of Portland. Look at this. They're coming here to terrorize us. Let's get violent. Let's throw them out. And that's exactly what the Chinese are doing as well. They cannot accept any kind of free speech, any kind of free exercise of religion. They pointed out that they're up against a massive propaganda machine that's being run by the central government in Hong Kong. Just like here in America, we are up against a massive propaganda machine that's being run by the central government in Washington, D.C. They said, talking about this, I think the Christian groups, said the guy who is with that organization I just quoted, the Catholic group, he said, I think the Christian groups and the Catholic groups should participate more in the protests and take a more major role, because I think nowadays the protests become more radical and people get very emotional. We have the responsibility and we have the power to calm our friends down. He said, I think singing hymns just in the beginning, it creates a peaceful atmosphere and it has the power to keep everyone very calm. So I think we can use this when we do this again. In other words, they're trying to achieve peaceful change. And he sees the Christians as being the center of that. Whereas here in America, in places like Portland and Chicago and so forth, if you were to start singing Christian hymns, that really triggers them, probably even more so than an American flag and chanting USA, USA. Going back to the tyranny of China, their one-child policy has now ended. It went from 1979 to 2015. There's a new documentary coming out. I'm very anxious to see this. It's coming out called One Child Nation, a film that is deeply personal portrait of a family life under the one-child regime and the draconian horrors that they committed. But then at the same time, we have the new star of Disney's Mulan. They're going to do a live-action remake of that, of course, and she is supporting the communist Chinese government. Why would that be? Would that be because Disney doesn't want to have any economic repercussions? Is that why these big corporations always side with the tyrannical Chinese? Welcome back. As I was saying, you have the star of the new Disney live-action version of Mulan kowtowing to the mainland communist Chinese government, as corporations always do. A good example of why this is necessary is the CEO of Cathay Pacific. Now, Cathay Pacific is probably one of, if not the best airlines in the world, based on the consumer ratings. I've never flown Cathay Pacific, but they're headquartered out of Hong Kong. They're actually the flag carrier of Hong Kong. And as a result, they're very susceptible to boycotts and punishment by the mainland Chinese government. And so they criticize the fact that the CEO there, Paul Liu, was the CEO was Rupert Hogg, the number two guy, his deputy, was also taken out. And the reason for it was because they were somewhat sympathetic to the people in Hong Kong, being a Hong Kong carrier. And the Chinese government wanted these people fired. Anybody that has anything to do with this, you fire them. If you find, you want you to go down and see the people who are working for you and take recrimination against them. Fire them if anybody that works for you is part of this. And this is the way we now have Google operating. not only taking action against anybody that exposes their lies, but also calling the police to have one of their whistleblowers SWAT teamed. And now California is talking about extending their red flag gun laws to allow employers to red flag their employees. How convenient. I'm sure Elon Musk would like that as well as Google. Probably Tim Cook as well. Oh, these people, they're looking to get a job somewhere else with a rival company. Let's red flag these guys and see what they can do from prison, that type of thing. And so Cathay Pacific eventually got the message, and they did fire 2 employees and 2 pilots because they participated in the demonstrations for due process for liberty. But the state-owned companies of China had already started a boycott because pretty much all the companies in China are state-owned. And if they are going to boycott you, then you're not going to have any customers. And so in order to appease the Chinese communists, the board of directors got rid of the number 1 and number 2 guys at Cathay Pacific. Frank Gaffney, writing at Breitbart, says that President Trump must declare, "I am a Hong Konger." Now, when I look at this, and of course what he's referring to is JFK, who gave the speech as the Soviets put a blockade around East Berlin, created the Iron Curtain, as Churchill called it. He said, they said, we're going to keep this open. We're going to airlift supplies in here if necessary. And he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." And the crowd began laughing because what he said was, "I am a jelly donut." The actual German would be, "Ich aus Berlin." I am from Berlin. But he actually called himself a jelly donut. That's why they cut that off right away. You don't hear the crowd response because they laughed at him. So hopefully President Trump, if he gets the opportunity, actually he doesn't need to speak in Chinese because most people in Hong Kong speak English. So he could just say it. I'm a Hong Konger. Is that something that would be wise to do? I mean, do we want to go to war with with China over Hong Kong? Well, it's not just Hong Kong. It's also Taiwan. As I pointed out last week, the fact that you had other corporations have to kowtow before President Xi because they had the audacity of putting on, it was Coach, a luxury brand. They had a T-shirt that listed all the different places that they did business throughout the world. They made the mistake of listing Hong Kong separate from China and listing Taiwan separate from China. And not only that, but listing Taipei, Taiwan, the capital of Taiwan. Oh, that was a major, major insult to the Chinese who believe they own everything. They're asserting their control over areas that are close to the Philippines as well. So pretty soon, they can claim they own the Philippines as well. I mean, President Trump is talking tough when it comes to trade with Hong Kong. And he's acting tough. And I'm glad that he is. It's time that he do that. And everybody is complaining that he is acting aggressively. No, the store was given away decades ago. It has been a bipartisan effort supported by Wall Street to say that they can charge 10 to 1 on goods and same goods and services. They will charge 25%. We are only allowed to charge 2.5%. And if President Trump wants to get a parity of that, then he is accused of being a protectionist. This is why it is so important for us to have independent press, because of the lies of the Wall Street Journal and CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, you name it, every single one of them. And now it looks like it's starting to metastasize to Fox News. Fox News does not want to see themselves blacklisted by Google, and so they're going to toe the corporate line as well. But President Trump is right in terms of this challenge to China's economic prowess there, and President Trump is pretty tough when he talks about that. He ought to be tough when he talks about freedom and liberty. I wish he would trash talk China as much as President Trump trash talks the Second Amendment and our individual liberties. That would be a great beginning. We don't necessarily have to get into a war. And we're not trying to start a war with the so-called trade war. I mean, that war has been going on for quite some time. And the Chinese and the globalists have pretty much bombed our factories and our manufacturing into oblivion. But Gaffney went on to say, he said, America's bipartisan leadership should declare today that we are Hong Kongers. If combined with a commitment to end the Chinese Communist ability to exploit Hong Kong's most favored nation trade status in the event its autonomy is ended, deterrence may just work again. In other words, we don't necessarily have to go to the point that we're doing in Iran of pushing in the American military right up to the edge of China like we're doing with Iran in a very provocative way with Iran. No, we don't have to push like that. But we could also push back and make this a part of the pressure for the trade equalization and to show the Chinese government for what they are, to expose them for what they are. He went on to say, this is not a trade war. We're in the midst of an economic war. And we are. That's been going on for quite some time. Unrestricted warfare is what the Chinese themselves have called it. That's been going on for decades. Not one we seek, not one we want, but one that has nonetheless been waged against us by communist China. I think it's short-sighted, ultimately doomed to treat what is going on now as though we can't say certain things or we can't stand for certain things vis-a-vis Hong Kong, lest it interfere with the achievement of a trade deal that at best, at the very best, will have some good new commitments from China, such as, oh, maybe we can get them to stop stealing our intellectual property, or maybe we can have them stop manipulating their currency, or maybe we can get them to stop their predatory trade practices. You have to understand, as Gaffney pointed out, he said Hong Kong is just one of the places where they're seeking to change the world order. The other one is here in the United States. Because everything that's being done in China is simply a beta test site. They're just a couple of years down the road. Already, you've got Facebook with its social credit scores. They've already set that up. They want to be able to identify you. They're offering that as a carrot to our authoritarian government that wants to partner with big corporations. The globalists are ushering in a worldwide government, and it is a worldwide government that is going to be completely fascist. They will sell it on the principles of socialism and of progressivism, but it will be completely fascist. It will be a public-private partnership between corporations and authoritarian governments who seek to control your free speech, who seek to shut down your due process. That's why I'm very concerned about what we see with the Second Amendment. And we've got updates on that coming up in the next hour. Folks, if you want to help to keep an independent and free media, InfoWars is at the forefront. It's been just over a year since they shut down InfoWars on social media, because that's going to be the point where they roll out the most control. If they can stop you from seeing and hearing things, if they can stop you from sharing and commenting on what you see and hear, you'll have nothing left. But the ABC, NBC, CBS, NPR, CNN, MSNBC, that group of people will be defining, and I'll include in that now Fox News. They will be defining what you can see and hear. We really do appreciate your support. You have stood by us in the last year. We still need your support, now more than ever, as the biggest corporations join with the biggest government in the world to try to silence the First Amendment. Right now, we have a sale at InfoWarsStore.com, 50 to 60% off our top-selling products. We've got Ultimate Krill Oil now back in stock. It was out for a while. 50% off. Rainforest Plus, 50% off many other items. InfoWarsStore.com. Welcome back. You know, as we're talking about China, I find it's absolutely amazing that even though Hillary Clinton had her ClintonEmails.com hacked, who would think that that would happen, right? I mean, you create... You create a private server, you buy a domain name, ClintonEmails.com, and you don't think, as your Secretary of State, and you have absolutely no security on that, you don't think that foreign governments are going to hack that, right? I mean, it's so obvious, and we've said it here before. It's so obvious. You got to really kind of wonder if this wasn't just a kind of a blind drop. You know, people could pay her in the back door and it's like, oh yeah, you can send me the money and I'll put some information there on ClintonEmails.com. I don't know who gets this. I know nothing. And as I've pointed out for over a year, that's why I'm kind of amazed at the story, but I'm glad that it's circulating again, reminding people. Epic News pointed out that Hillary Clinton's emails are being sent to a Chinese company. Well, we said that. So they were getting over a year ago, we were saying, look, the information came out that everything that she sent, everything that she received, a copy was being sent to China. And I also pointed out, which has not come out in this news article here, I also pointed out that she had, that coincided, that period of time where she had that unsecure server and everything was being sent to China. That also just happened to coincide with the time that the entire U.S. intelligence network inside communist China was rounded up and either jailed or executed as an example to other people. See, this isn't just about destroying national security. People that are part of national security were killed because of the actions of Hillary Clinton. And yet, still, nothing is done about her. Nothing at all. And we still are, the left is still, because of the power of corporate media to dominate and to send out a carefully crafted narrative, because they've hammered Russia, Russia, Russia over and over again. All they do is talk about Russia. And we just saw this again. You know, oh, well, this must, everything, whatever it is, it's Russia. They never talk about China. China is actually even more of a dangerous opponent than Russia is. They actually did hack all of Hillary's stuff. And yet they only focus on Russia. Absolutely absurd. But there are cyber hacks that are going on out of Russia as well as China. We saw over the weekend some interesting things. We had U.S. Customs and Border Protection computers went down for quite some time over the weekend, created big problems for anybody that was doing an international flight. Again, it was U.S. Customs and Border Protection computers went down. Was that a hack, or was that something that happened internally in the country? We do know that many different locations here in Texas, including Austin, suffered ransomware attack. There's more than 20 local government entities. Now we know that one of those is here in Austin. We've had situations not too long ago where we had the city of Atlanta hit with a ransomware attack. Last spring, Baltimore got hit with an attack, and they were going to spend more than $20 million on this. You know, we look at the power issues also here in this area. Southwest Electric Power right here in Texas, they're getting power outages. You know, we look at this, kind of like the New York blackouts. It's kind of hard sometimes to tell whether your power grid is being destroyed by Democrats pushing an environmentalist agenda and shutting down capacity because it's coal-based, or whether it is some kind of a foreign hacker who is taking down your control grid. But I'll tell you one thing that it shows us, and we ought to keep this in mind as we look at smart cities and 5G. If you don't care about the health effects, do you care about the fact that our infrastructure is getting incredibly fragile and vulnerable? Not to mention the health effects, not to mention the tyrannical privacy invasion that it aids. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's talk a little bit more about China, about the economic and trade issues, about the military competition that's coming up. Because, you know, when we look at what is happening there in terms of China using the fact that it is, quite frankly, China Incorporated. It is a partnership between the Chinese communists and all these different companies. They're all owned by the Chinese communists. And they use it as a monolithic entity to punish any corporations that don't do exactly as they say. That's why Hollywood has become its handmaid. That's why they're inserting all of these things that are making China and Chinese culture and Chinese individuals look superior. That is the demand of the Chinese government. If you don't do that, they're not going to let you play in that country. And they're doing the same thing when it comes to the Great Firewall of China, the censorship that they erected, as well as their social credit scores. You've got Google working with them. You've got Facebook working with them, and they're setting up those same structures here in the United States. But let's take a look at what's going on with business. As we saw last week, the Wall Street Journal continuing to attack President Trump for trying to get rid of the massive trade advantage that has been handed to China since Henry Kissinger gave them preferential treatment decades ago. The Wall Street Journal editorial board and some others continue to publish foolish articles that demonstrate that they understand nothing about trade or business, said President Trump. Nothing. And that's what he said during the New Hampshire rally last week. He said, I lose all the cards if we take off the tariffs. Why? Well, because the trade that they have with us now is many, many times greater than we have. So they're the ones who stand to lose the most. President Trump truly is holding all the cards, and he can adjust this. But the Wall Street Journal and the big business concerns that are behind globalism do not want that. President Trump said, the fact is the leaders in my position, they did not do a damn thing. They didn't talk. Past leaders followed the terrible advice of these editorial boards that are frankly totally inexperienced in business, I guess, and our industries were utterly devastated. Yeah, that's true. But it is bad advice. But it's not simply bad advice. These people are aligned against U.S. interests. They don't identify as Americans. They don't see themselves as Americans. They don't want to see America do well. They want to do well. And if they can do well by making us poor, they'll do that. And that's exactly what they've done. So it isn't stupidity. It is maliciousness. President Trump is being charitable. I hope he understands where this is. I think he does. Globalism enriches foreign countries at our expense, he said. I love our country. I'm president of the U.S., and I am not president of the world. He said they're not too happy, talking about China. They're losing millions of jobs. The tariffs are working, and they're eating the tariffs. There is no price increase. And the data backs up President Trump. Chinese factory output is the weakest in 17 years. Every goal has been missed, reports Zero Hedge last week. Take a look at Chinese industrial production. As they point out, it was a big miss. Now, typically, it's been about 6.3%. They'd expected 6%, so they expected a small decline. Instead, they got 4.8%. That was a big miss. Also, retail sales in China, another big miss. It's typically been 9.8% prior. They had expected it to drop from 9.8 to 8.6, but it actually went to 7.6. Really big miss on Chinese retail sales. And the same thing with fixed asset investment, property investment, surveyed jobless rate, all of those much lower than they had anticipated. And as you look at this, the only way to, President Trump is right. He is winning in this war. Now, there are cards that they can play, which isn't really going to help them much. They can devalue their currency, but that's only going to go a little ways. President Trump truly is holding all the cards economically, and he could double down and show people why we do not want this kind of Hong Kong style, and I wish he would, because we don't want this here in America. And I see the federal government beginning to organize with the same motives that the Chinese government is doing, and we need to speak out against that. It isn't just an economic issue, and it isn't simply a military issue that Hong Kong is building a massive military and acting like they want to take over other areas of the country, attack Taiwan and so forth. No, it's much more than that. It's what's happening internally to the Chinese people in mainland China, but especially in Hong Kong. You know, we should be speaking out against these policies, and we would be if it wasn't for the fact that Washington, even under the Trump administration, Washington is still pushing under Trump to establish the kind of Chinese controls that we see happening in mainland China here against Americans. But again, going back to the business issue in Hong Kong itself, they're trying to bribe the people there with a $2 billion stimulus. Isn't it always that way? We have seen this for the longest period of time. This has been the approach of the American government. As they take away our individual liberty, they promise us security. And that includes financial security. They say, we're going to have to take away your guns to keep you safe. We're going to have to fight in foreign wars. And we're going to have to overthrow other governments because that'll keep you. Well, no, actually what it does is it creates terrorists. And that kind of blowback eventually finds its way back into America. And then when it starts to come back into America, they say, well, we need to take even more of your freedoms, because now we've got these people who are angry in foreign countries who want to come here and do violence to us on a asymmetric warfare type of terrorist attack. So we're going to have to treat all of you as terrorists. And when it comes to economic security, they try to pacify us, just like the Hong Kong government is doing. The Hong Kong financial secretary said he now expects GDP growth to be between 0 and 1% this year, down from an earlier forecast of 2 to 3%. And so they're going to try to bribe people to try to keep them happy. President Trump calls China's President Xi a good man and a tough business. As he's talking about the Hong Kong unrest, he says, I have zero doubt that if President Xi wants to quickly and humanely solve the Hong Kong problem, he can do it. And then President Trump tweeted, personal meeting, maybe? You know, can you get together and meet with these people who are not happy about what's going on? Which tells me that President Trump doesn't really understand the issue here. Because President Trump doesn't understand the importance of individual liberty and due process. Joshua Moravchik, author of Heaven on Earth, The Rise and Fall of Socialism, said, I think he's enormously underestimating the underlying issue here. This is not some misunderstanding that we can just sit down together and iron out. This is the issue that people want freedom. They want freedom. They want due process. In a follow-up tweet, President Trump said, what I said, I think that it would be, he could meet directly and personally with a protester. So that's what he's talking about. He's not talking about having a personal meeting with President Trump. When he said personal meeting, ? No, the next day he said if President Xi would meet directly and personally with the protesters, there would be a happy and enlightened ending to the Hong Kong problem. I have no doubt. No, because President Xi is not going to compromise on his total control. He's not going to compromise and take down the great firewall of China. He's not going to end the social credit scores, where if you don't do exactly as the Chinese government wants, if you protest or even talk against the policies that are being conducted by the Chinese government, if you don't cheerlead them, in other words, you are enemies of the state. You will have your job career ruined. You will be grounded. You'll not be able to move. And you'll be punished in many other ways. You'll have your bank accounts shut down. That is precisely what is being ushered in cooperation between DARPA and the Pentagon and the big Silicon Valley companies who are also working with China to do a beta test. This is what's being done here in America. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Second Amendment and why that issue of individual liberty and due process is so important. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. As Sleepy Joe starts falling in the polls, and Elizabeth Warren has caught up or overtaken him in many of the polls, he is taking an interesting tack on gun control, as pointed out by the Mises Institute. As they point out, you typically have two different arguments made in support of the Second Amendment. The first one, of course, is self-defense, the right of self-defense against ordinary criminals, individual private criminals, as opposed to the second argument, which is a defense against tyranny, being able to defend yourself against the organized criminal gangs, organized under the government. When we look at the first one and we talk about gun control laws, we see, as the example given by the Mises Institute, just one of them. I mean, just take a look at Chicago. But they give the example of Baltimore. They said it has a homicide rate that is 10 times that of the U.S. overall. And we see the same thing in Chicago. Every week we have more people killed there than happen in a typical mass shooting, and yet the media no longer pays any attention to it. We report it on a regular basis, but certainly not the establishment corporate media that is pushing gun control. They will never talk about that. And as I've mentioned many times, one of the reasons that is happening is because of the war on drugs. Last time we had people in Chicago shooting each other, drive-by shootings with fully automatic weapons, and they were not weapons that looked like military weapons, but were semi-automatic. No, they were fully automatic Tommy guns, and they would shoot at people as they drove by. That was because you had rival drug cartels, if you will. The drug of choice at that time was alcohol. That was during alcohol prohibition. So whenever you have prohibition like that, whenever you have something that is highly desired by the population, whether it is alcohol or other drugs, you're going to have organized crime get a monopoly in that black market. And take a look at what's happening in Mexico. In Mexico, you got more people killed there than in Afghanistan or anywhere else for that matter. Now that the bombing has stopped in Syria, the most violent place on earth is Mexico. They nearly matched the kill rates during the Syrian war when you had bombing going on. They nearly matched that with just small arms and machetes in Mexico because of the violence of drug prohibition. And so if we're going to go, as I've pointed out before, to gun prohibition, you can expect that to go way up. Whatever you try to prohibit, you always wind up with a far more lethal form of it. That was true during alcohol prohibition. People stopped consuming as much beer and wine. They started going to hard liquor. You had people that were making wood alcohol without any conscience or repercussions and selling that to people. They'd go blind. You have the same thing happening in the war of drugs. Even our own government has been doing things like creating crack cocaine so they could finance their war in Central America. Yeah, that was all the crack cocaine epidemic. That was our American government trying to fund their secret war. And so when we look at that, we need to put that in the context as well. But certainly the gun control is not working. And, these people say, well, people can freely buy guns in Virginia and they take them up and shoot people in Maryland with it. Well, why isn't that happening in Virginia then? That's always the obvious answer. So that is a difficult problem for them. So they decided that they will not address that. Instead, they want to talk about the defense against tyranny argument. As Mises points out, this argument depends heavily on making the case that a standing army controlled by the federal government is a threat to freedom. As it now stands, this is not a popular argument. The argument that people want to be able to protect themselves is a popular, very well understood argument. Whenever we have one of these mass shootings, you see gun sales skyrocket because people want to be able to protect themselves. I understand the police can't be everywhere. Sheriff David Clark said that. He said, look, we're going to do what we can to stop this kind of stuff, and we'll get there as soon as we can. But understand, you're on your own for a while until we can get there. You need to be able to defend yourself. So get a gun, learn how to use it properly, take classes, take training in it, learn how to use it safely and effectively, and we'll get there as soon as we can, and we'll catch these guys as soon as we can. But you are your own first line of defense. So people understand that. What they don't understand, however, is the real purpose of the Second Amendment. And that is the purpose that is right now under attack by Joe Biden. In the 1660s, writes Mises, it was agreed that troops were necessary to maintain order, but few trusted the central government with the task. Thus, a nationwide militia composed of civilians who would, as in earlier days, be summoned in time of need. And that kind of militia persisted even in Great Britain into the 1800s. The Massachusetts militia successfully put down the Shays Rebellion in the early days of America. Militias were successfully employed in defense against Indian raids. They were used as part of the invasion force during the Mexican War. And undergirding the idea of the militia was always the belief that a sizable federal standing army was a threat to American freedoms. As a matter of fact, I could read you a long list of quotes from the founders of this country who very explicitly said that. They said the means of defense abroad will be used as tyranny at home if we allow a standing military. And we never had a permanent standing military until the end of the Second World War. They said outside of the Navy, the military force ought to be decentralized and subject to state and local control. So, we see that repeated as we have talk of all of our regime change wars. We got to get boots on the ground in order to really control that area. Yeah, we have total air superiority. You look at the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. There isn't anybody there that has a chance of responding to American naval, especially air power. America could do whatever they wished in those areas. They could decimate the military, the infrastructure of those areas, but they still needed boots on the ground. And isn't it interesting that as they put boots on the ground, they have always lost that war, that asymmetric war, a war where you would expect that the highly trained, highly equipped, very superior training and equipment of the U.S. military, you would think that they'd be able to control that area, wouldn't you? Except a small percentage of the population armed with small arms can hold them at bay forever. And eventually we have lost every one of the asymmetric wars that we've had with very lightly armed populations compared to the United States. And this is something that has always been an argument. Now it's an argument by Joe Biden. You got Anderson Cooper saying, so to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means that they're going to come for my guns. And Joe Biden said, bingo, you're right if you have an assault weapon. And then he goes on to make the argument that you don't need to have an assault weapon. It isn't going to do you any good against a tyrannical government anyway. No, it's just the opposite. And they very well know that. We'll talk more about that when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Joe Biden has tried to seem more reasonable than the other people in the Democrat Party, all trying to outreach each other on the left when it comes to socialist economics. But Joe Biden has never been a friend of individual liberty. As a matter of fact, I remember him during the Clarence Thomas hearings. He was criticized then and now by many on the left that he wasn't sufficiently behind Anita Hill and her Me Too allegations. And again, her allegations were unproven. They were later proven to be totally hypocritical when she accused Clarence Thomas, just the two of them. That's what he said, she said. Nobody witnessed any of this. There was no proof outside of what she had to say, and he had a different story. But she accused him of saying certain things and certain innuendo that was said to her. Didn't accuse him of using his power against her in the office. Didn't accuse him of physical sexual assault or rape or anything like that. And within a couple of years, Anita Hill was defending President Trump against the so-called bimbos who were accusing, she was defending President Clinton against the bimbos who were accusing him of sexual assault and violent attacks. They didn't have a right to be believed, right? And the accusations that they had were very serious. But she and the other feminist leaders who had come against Clarence Thomas rallied behind Bill Clinton, showing that her mild accusations compared to anything that Clinton was accused of, her mild accusations were merely political attacks. And at that time, Joe Biden really didn't jump into that too much, but he really laid into Clarence Thomas over the idea of natural rights. Joe Biden doesn't believe there is such a thing as natural rights. He believes that everything is a government-granted privilege, and he doubled down on this last week with Anderson Cooper. And he made this point when it comes to the Second Amendment. He came after not the right to be able to defend yourself, but he came after what it's really about, and that is a check against government tyranny. Anderson Cooper said, so to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns, and he goes, bingo, you're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is, said Joe Biden, they should be illegal, period. Look, the Second Amendment doesn't say that you can't restrict the kinds of weapons that people own. You can't buy a bazooka. You can't have a flamethrower. Well, tell that to Elon Musk. I think he just sold a bunch of those flamethrowers, didn't he? Anyway, he said the guys who make these arguments are the people who say the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots. You know, people like Thomas Jefferson say things like that. Yeah, we don't like people like Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson also said something else that Joe Biden doesn't like, that we have certain inalienable rights that are given to us by our Creator. And Joe Biden didn't like that at all. He really hated that idea of natural rights. Anyway, he says, they say we need protection against the government. We need an F-15 for that. We need something well beyond whether or not you're going to have an assault weapon. This is an argument that you need to be able to respond to. This is an argument that you need to not be ashamed to respond to, because their tactic is to make anybody that makes this argument look like they are dangerous or delusional. And it's not. First of all, talk about the people in Hong Kong who say, I wish we had a Second Amendment. If those 1.7 million people in Hong Kong had firearms, do you think they'd be so worried about the Chinese Communist government invading them? It is a deterrent in the same way that nuclear weapons and all these other major weapons that the giant military industrial complex has are a deterrent. The very basis of our entire military industrial complex in the defense industry, all these F-15s and everything else, is to have this so that it is a deterrent, peace through strength. And that applies between the people of the country and the government as well. You better not do these things. There's always this implied threat of force, both on the side of the government when they pass the laws and on the side of the people when we have things like firearms, when we have things like juries. And if we don't understand what those things are for, then we lose those freedoms. For now, he's not going to argue against the guns for self-defense, but he's saying that people don't need guns beyond what's necessary for personal defense. So he's conceding that point. He'll come for the personal defense guns later. Right now, they want to come after anything. They want to use the excuse that, well, you're gearing up for war. No. We have these weapons as a deterrent to war. But as the Mises Institute points out, very few people are willing to go on CNN and say, yes, I think military-grade rifles and armored vehicles with belt-fed machine guns should be perfectly legal to everyone at any time. I said few are willing to say that for good reason. They'd be mocked. They'd be dismissed as utterly irrelevant. Well, see, I would say that. Invite me on CNN. I'll give you your soundbite. I'll tell you that the Come and Take It flag at Goliad, Texas, has a cannon on it. Has a cannon on it. That's right. When they went to Concord and Lexington, they were coming not just for the military weapons, they were coming for the cannons as well. And so you want to look at what happened in the American Revolution? Well, look at what happened in the Texas Revolution. They were coming after full military weapons. Full military weapons. And if you don't think, I've had many people, when I was working with the Libertarian Party, when I was a candidate with the Libertarian Party, they'd say, seriously, you can't say that guns are a defense against the American military. It's like, well, surely then we would have already won the war in Afghanistan and Iraq or in all these other places that we have lost the war, right? Take a look at the Warsaw Ghetto uprising during World War II. Those people didn't have any guns at first, and then with a hammer or two, they got some small arms, and they were able to hold down a panzer division for quite some time. And if small arms had been more widespread, it would have been an uncontrollable situation for the Nazis as well. It would have been their Afghanistan, or an unwinnable war. And so they point out that, this is the tack that is going to be taken by Joe Biden and the others. We don't have to worry about a tyrannical government, do we? A militarized government, do we, that's going to attack the citizens? Just take a look at Iowa, where the cops have bought an armored vehicle with $300,000 in asset forfeiture funds. It's both police militarization and civil asset forfeiture combined, reports Reason. The sheriff's office in Lynn County, Iowa, announced the purchase of a Bearcat G2 armored vehicle with $297,000 in funds obtained via civil asset forfeiture. These are the same people saying that you don't need to have anything that's militarized, and we're going to take your guns without any due process. See, they've already taken people's property without any due process. That's what civil asset forfeiture is. And then they use it to buy militarized weapons to keep you under control. Nothing to worry about there, right? Although Iowa has established limits on asset forfeiture, the practice is still going on in the state. In 2017, because of the abuse of these police departments in organized theft, taking property without finding people guilty, without even charging them with a crime, The Iowa legislature passed a law requiring a criminal conviction before property. See, that's what we call due process. We got to repeat this to these people. This is due process, and due process matters. And you do the due process first before you take anything. But what they did was they left themselves a loophole. They said that only applies to property that is valued less than $5,000. Isn't that amazing? So if the property is valued more than $5,000, they don't need to charge you with a crime. They don't need to convict you with a crime. They can just steal it. That's your government. And now they're talking about doing the same thing with firearms. You should be concerned, and you should speak out on what due process is. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Yeah, I wish you would get out of our lives. There's a lot of people that I wish would get out of our lives. The only way that we're going to get them out of our lives, people like Joe Biden, is if we take back the power that has been taken away unconstitutionally by the federal government. And the only way that we're going to do that is to organize at the local level. But we also have a lot of corruption at the local level, as I just reported to you. What is happening at the state and local level? We have sheriff's offices throughout the country, like this one in Iowa, in Lynn County, Iowa, stealing money from citizens. They call it civil asset forfeiture. Again, they're very careful not to call it criminal forfeiture. They pretend that if you violate a regulation that was written by a bureaucracy, that they don't have to give you due process. So you don't have a presumption of innocence. There is no protection against excessive fines, and they don't have to find you guilty. As a matter of fact, they don't even have to charge you with anything. They don't even have to give you a trial. They just take it. And they say, well, it's civil. It's a civil case. I just steal it. And now if you want it back, you got to sue me in court. They do that with our children, with CPS. Same exact process. Same exact process. Take the children, do the due process later. Take the vehicle, do the due process later. And so they take your children. You don't know what the charges are. Very rarely are there ever even allegations. Only about 15% of the cases is there even an allegation of a threat of violence or sexual assault by the parents. But they take the kids, and then you have to fight them in court. You have to try to discover what you are accused of. The children are taken in a secret ex parte process. Many cases, you're not even there. This is something that is done between a social worker and a judge. So you're not there. That's what ex parte means. They take your child, and then you have to try to discover why, and you have to try to prove your innocence. Go hire a lawyer, same way, to try to get back your property. And now they want to do this with guns. And they want to create a massive federal bureaucracy. That's what Lindsey Graham is pushing. And he's pushing it, says that President Trump is very committed to this. A massive psychiatric bureaucracy that can accuse you of anything. They come and take your guns, and then you have to sue them to try to get that back. Now, Joe Biden, again, attacking the Second Amendment in general, not going after just red flag gun laws, but saying, no, we're going to take all, quote unquote, assault weapons. And again, that is a very malleable definition for them, very broadly defined. He drew 30 supporters in New Hampshire. At the same time, President Trump had more than 12,000 and thousands standing outside, standing room only. Yeah, that's not 30,000 for Joe Biden. That's not 3,000 or 300. No, that was 30. 30. And that's more typical of what we've really seen. That's why if President Trump loses this election, it's going to be because of election guard and things like that. I don't think that it's going to be a real vote if President Trump loses this. That's why you have DARPA directly funding election guard and news guard with Microsoft. I've told you many times how they put these various internet competitors in and then let the best of them rise to the top. But that's how you got Facebook and Google and Twitter and others in charge of the digital public square as the internet became practical. The CIA created a venture capital firm, In-Q-Tel, went open with it. I mean, they'd been given money to various companies to work for them in the past, but they were always quiet about it. But they did that openly. And you have a lot of the intelligence community, high-ranking officials sitting on the board of directors of these various companies. And just like you've got approved candidates who are allowed to run for the presidency, and then you have a real competition between those candidates, but you have to get on that approved list. You have to be a part of the club. You have to be malleable and in alignment with their priorities and their agenda. Okay, once you are, then you get a chance to play in that world. They fund you. Right now, it's getting even more obvious because we've got DARPA giving a $10 million grant to a small company that is that their only sponsor, their only benefactor, but they're working under the umbrella of Microsoft to create Election Guard. They're going to create an operating system for electronic voting. It will allow them to count the votes. How absurd is this? I don't hear anybody really talking about this. That is incredibly dangerous. So, yeah, President Trump can have 12,000 people show up in an arena, and Joe Biden can have 30. But if Microsoft and DARPA, the same people, DARPA and these people in the military-industrial complex and the intelligence community in Washington, the same people that tried to overthrow the last election, they're now going to be counting the votes with the help of Microsoft. And they're doing it openly. And they're also guarding the news, telling you which news sites you should be allowed to see, which ones you shouldn't. They're providing cover with Election Guard for people who want an excuse and plausible deniability for their censorship. But getting back to guns, we got Senator Manchin yesterday was on CBS's Face the Nation. He said that there had been good dialogue with President Trump on gun control. Again, this is a Democrat senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin. He has already betrayed his voters on the Second Amendment, and now he is working with President Trump to betray President Trump's voters. He said he was asked by the CBS on Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan was the host there. She said, "You've spoken to the president this time. Will he go out there and twist arms to get Republicans on board with this bill?" Manchin said, "Trump has, quote, a golden opportunity to make America safe again." Did you vote for that? Did you vote to make America safe again? I didn't vote for that. By using background checks, he said that's going to be a basic building block. Yeah, it will be. They will. You know how they'll build on that? I pointed that out last week. They will build on the background checks. They will build a registration of all guns and gun owners, because this is about people control. This is about controlling you. This is not about controlling your gun. When they take your money, when they take your property, when they take your children, when they take your firearms, it's about controlling you. Now, this is going to be done gradually because that's the way infringement works. That's why the founders who understood the nature of tyranny, they understood human nature, they knew how this would unroll. They said this, the right of the people, not the right of the government. This is not talking about the rights of the military, but the rights of the people shall not be infringed. Here's how they're going to infringe it, though, gradually moving the boundaries and making what is your property, your rights, their rights. The background checks will be done at all gun shows as well as all private online sales, but they'll carve out an exception for the time being. They'll carve out an exception for sales between friends and family, as long as you don't advertise that online. Manchin also said, when asked about Lindsey Graham, he said, the red flag bill that Lindsey Graham and a lot of us are working on makes sense. That if we can identify and get somebody help before they do something, some horrible tragedy should be done. And we have the ability to do these things that really make sense. President Trump, this is yours. It doesn't happen until you stand up and you have a bill that you basically support. And this is your piece of legislation. Yeah, that's right. President Trump took the lead in red flags already once. Take the guns, we'll do the due process later. That's exactly what red flag is. And it should be a gun sense bill that makes sense to all gun owners. Judge Napolitano said gun confiscation under red flag laws is unconstitutional. He pointed out it is a matter of historical fact that colonists won the war because they had superior firepower, not equivalent, but superior. And he makes he puts out a very inconvenient fact for the people like Joe Manchin and Lindsey Graham and President Trump. who say and Joe Biden, who say you shouldn't have any military weapons. He points out that during the American Revolution, our War of Independence, the colonial weapon of choice was the Kentucky long rifle. It was actually a German design, but it was perfected and manufactured in Pennsylvania. Now, that Kentucky long rifle had a range of 200 yards. The British were using a rifle called the Brown Betsy. The Brown Betsy had a range of 80 yards. So the colonials had a gun that had a range of 200 yards. The British soldiers had a gun that had a range of 80 yards. The colonialists could shoot them 2.5 times the distance that they could fire back. Oh, and by the way, they were wearing red clothes too as a target. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. As I just pointed out, Judge Napolitano gave us the undeniable historical fact that the common rifle of the colonialists had a range of 200 yards. The British Army had one that had a range of 80 yards. Guess who won? You see, it's not just having military weapons. They had superior military weapons to the government's military weapons. And again, they were coming after not only those kinds of rifles, but they were coming after the cannons at Concord and Lexington. Santa Anna came after the cannons at Goliad, and so forth. The way that you have peace is through strength. The government is always telling us that. They're always saying, we got to spend more money on the military, and we got to do it as a deterrent. It's not that we want war everywhere. No. We want to make sure that people understand that we can defend ourselves and will defend ourselves, and so that they won't attack us. That's why you need to have that, because that is now the argument that is being made over and over again. That's why they're coming after assault weapons. They'll come after the other guns later, but they're coming after assault weapons because nobody wants to make the argument that we need to defend ourselves against the government. People are afraid. They're ashamed to say that. They know that they'll be laughed at, that they'll be ridiculed, that they'll be labeled as dangerous. But it's the government that is militarizing the police. It's the government that is taking property without any due process. Do you think that you're going to be safe because the Supreme Court is going to defend your liberties, defend the Constitution? The Supreme Court will not defend your liberty. Now, this article from the Daily Caller points out liberal justices are still notching victories despite the fact that we have a conservative Supreme Court. Do we have a conservative Supreme Court? I don't think so. Has the Supreme Court ever, even Scalia, stood in the way of the government violating the Bill of Rights? Never. They don't care if they spy on you, if they do surveillance without a warrant. They don't care if they search you without cause. TSA does that all the time. The NSA does that all the time. They maintain this fiction that if you have a cell phone, then all of that data belongs to the government. They did the same thing with the internet companies. They worked very hard to pass CISPA, SOPA, ACTA, PIPA, CISPA again. Then finally they called it CISA and they got it passed. But it's all about protecting the corporations from you suing them when they turn your information over to them. They say, well, if these corporations have information, the corporations can turn this over to us, and now you can't do anything about it if the corporations turn this over. See, that kind of process where they use a private corporation to do their bidding is exactly what's going on with internet censorship. They always say, well, they would never come out and say, we're going to shut you down because we don't like your political speech. But they will say, but a private corporation can do this. This is why it's so reprehensible when we see these sites that are supposedly conservative, sites like Reason Magazine, think tanks that are libertarian, saying, no, the corporations can do this. The government couldn't do it. I would have a big problem if the government did that, but the government's not doing it. A corporation is doing it. Well, it's corporations that are doing surveillance without search warrants as well. Same tactic. And as I pointed out many times, they use that same tactic to make sure that third parties and independents could never participate in campaign debates, shutting down political speech. And they say, oh, it's not us. It's this private organization here in the state. It's the Association of Journalists and Press that is running the debate. And so they can decide who they want to listen to and who they don't. And that's a private corporation. So it's not government censorship. It's just that the Republicans and Democrats who run the government want these individuals to do that. When we look at the 5-4 majority that is decided in 10 decisions, a 5-justice majority, 10 times it was 4 liberals and 1 conservative. In contrast, conservative justices joined together to form a 5-member majority in only 7 cases. So yeah, you've got a majority so-called of conservative Republican judges, but they're voting with the liberal bloc. What a surprise. Welcome back. You know, we have a philosopher from Slovenia speaking truth to us. Of course, it's something that I've said, that we've said here at InfoWars since we were purged, and actually before we were purged, talking about how free speech is being taken away from us. But he had this to say. He said, modern censorship is more dangerous than open totalitarianism. It is concealed. It is incorporated into our daily routine. That is a Slovenian philosopher. His name is Slavoj Zizek. And he was commenting on the latest revelations about Google that came through Project Veritas. He said, we all know that we have to censor certain things at some level. He said there is a false dichotomy that is being put out there, false choice. On the one hand, complete censorship, and on the other hand, radical liberalism. He goes, there's going to be things in between that you're going to want to have censored, right? You don't want kiddie porn out there, for example, or snuff films, or violent terrorist actions. He said the problem, however, is not between those two extremes, allowing everything out there or setting up gatekeepers who are going to take certain things away. The problem is that they're not transparent about it. The problem is that you're not allowed to debate what should be taken off and what shouldn't be taken off, and that they've got this hidden agenda. He said what's terrifying about all this is that we don't even experience it as something that is controlled. We just use social media. We buy things. We go to a doctor. And all the data about us is out there. But those are the things that we perceive as our freedom. So what we perceive as freedom becomes the very way that we are controlled. He's talking about the metadata. He's talking about the human domain analytics, the activity-based intelligence that is out there. They can monitor everything that we do. They can monitor and scrape our opinions off of social media. Stop calling it Facebook. Call it LifeLog. That was what it was designed for. That's what it replaced. It is a log of everything about you through your entire life. And that's its purpose. And the other aspect of this is the fact that there is hidden control and hidden censorship. As I was saying Friday, you know, the quote out of Fahrenheit 451, where the police chief is lecturing the protagonist and saying, look, we want them to have the perception that they can get access to everything. You know, we want them to be able to look up all this trivia, you know, how many peanuts are manufactured per year in this jurisdiction, or this or that. We want them to be overwhelmed with information, just not with any information that would make them unhappy, just not with any information that would make us look bad. So yeah, let them go online and see everything, right? And you have the illusion that you have freedom and that you have access to information, when in reality, the information is being very tightly curated and controlled. Even more so than in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. That's what's now being done by our so-called search engine that gives you free access to everything. So you have the illusion of total information access when it's really, the actuality is it's total information control about anything that they think is important. They will push their agendas. They will be able to see whether or not you are accepting their narratives. That is the reality of what is behind this, and that's what makes it so insidious. People don't even know that they're being controlled. They don't know that they're being monitored. They don't know that they're being given social credit scores, just like in China. They just haven't rolled out the penalties for that sort of thing yet. And, you know, when we look at Chris Wallace and the fact that he is going to war with President Trump now, and Fox News, and President Trump has taken him on over this last weekend, there is an article in The Hill, Chris Wallace becomes the Trump era's equal opportunity inquisitor. And so they put it out there as like, oh yeah, you know, he's coming after President Trump. But see, he did that to Vladimir Putin as well. Again, it's the subtle way that the Hill equates President Trump with Vladimir Putin. And so they have this story there where Chris Wallace is saying, you know, I was doing an interview with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. And he said, I thought, I've got a really great interview here now, but I've got one great question left. And I'm thinking, should I ask it or not? And I thought to myself, well, what the hell, he said. And so he said, so I asked, why is it that so many of the people who oppose Vladimir Putin end up dead? And he said there was an audible gasp in the room from the Russians, but it paid off. It paid off, and it got him publicity and so forth. Well, look, fine. That's a good question to ask. That's a legitimate question to ask Vladimir Putin. But I would ask Chris Wallace if he would ever ask that of Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton. If he's got Bill or Hillary there in front of him, do you think that Chris Wallace would ever ask them, why is it so many people who oppose Bill Clinton, why is it so many people who oppose Hillary Clinton end up dead? He would never ask that question. He is not an equal opportunity inquisitor. No, quite frankly, as you could see in those leaked documents from Google, Fox News is very highly placed. And they are maintaining that position for a number of reasons. Now, one of them is they don't want to offend Google. Another one is they don't want to offend their sponsors, big pharmaceutical companies. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. That is also now tied into these shootings. The common thread that nobody ever wants to talk about, SSRIs. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Folks, if you have been supporting us over the last years, we've been the focus of attack on free speech, on a free press, on an independent press. We have been the focus of attack by the biggest corporations the world has ever seen, all working together in concert to censor us at the same time. And now in the last year, you realize it wasn't us. It was free speech and independent media that they're coming after. Because now they're coming after people like Tucker Carlson. They've come after, just 2 months after us, they came after 800 different sites. But it was after InfoWars because we were having the biggest effect. And you have stood with us over this last year. We still need your help, and we are trying to help you to help us as well. Part of our World Awakens mega sale is going on right now, 50 to 60% off the top selling items at InfoWarsStore.com. Many of our popular products have sold out, but some of our most popular products are still available at 50 to 60% off. We've gotten Ultimate Krill Oil back in stock, 50% off. Brain Force Plus, my favorite supplement, I call it Brain Focus. That is 50% off. Knockout, our all-natural sleep aid, 50% off. Bodies, our all-natural anti-inflammatory product. Again, it has turmeric and many other ingredients that are natural, food-based ingredients that are very effective at helping you to fight inflammation. Bod Ease, 50% off. Turbo Force, 50% off. Many other great deals and specials, 50 to 60% off at InfoWarsStore.com. We really do appreciate your support. You know, as we look at the Supreme Court as a bulwark to protect our liberties, I pointed out that the 5-4 weighting decision that we've seen is typically going toward the liberals. Why? Because they always consistently vote, predictably and monolithically, they vote for liberal causes. They are very political in their agenda. The conservatives, however, will look at this stuff and say, well, all right, this is what I think about this particular issue. And over again, we see 5-4. We see one conservative go with the always monolithic liberals on a particular issue. You cannot, and we will never get back our freedoms if we go with the idea that we're going to allow the Supreme Court to preside over what our freedoms are. You know, we have to understand that we have to take this back at the local level. We have to assert the 9th and 10th Amendment. We have to elect people at the local level that will stand up and take these people on and say, you don't have any authority to do this. We've already done it with medical marijuana and with recreational marijuana. We need to do it with these other issues as well. Guns are one of the key issues that we're going to have to do this on. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Yeah, they can read our minds. They can look at what we're doing, our social media activity. They can follow us as we use their maps programs. They can look at that metadata and they can read our minds. They can predict what we're going to do, perhaps better than we can. One of the things that we should be pushing back in this gun control issue, again, is the SSRI antidepressants. Now we've got yet another one of these mass shooters. Turns out from the autopsy was using SSRIs. What a surprise. Many times we've talked about this, the common thread. It really is a mass murder pill. And yet the very psychiatric industry that has been pushing this to people who are depressed, they give them these antidepressants. And as I've pointed out before, I've done an interview with the lady who has the website, ssristories.net. You should take a look at that. Documented over and over again. Incidents where people commit suicide, often with a gun, or they try to. The incident with one child who did not shoot up his classroom, but went to the classroom, pointed a gun at them, pointed the gun back at himself, pointed the gun at them, pointed it back at him. Eventually, they got it away. After he got off of the effects of that drug, he explained to them how he had a blackout. He didn't know what he was doing. He was walking around a catatonic state, pointing a gun at people, pointing a gun at himself. But it doesn't always work out that way. And as she was pointing out, once they put you on these drugs, any change in medication level is very, very dangerous. If you give people more of this, it can trigger an incident like that. If you give people less, or if they decide they don't want to be on this drug because it does have other physical and mental side effects, if they decide that they're going to just get off of that drug on their own, that can trigger one of these incidents. It's analogous to a diver who goes down deep, and once you go down deep, the nitrogen starts to dissolve into your bloodstream. And if you come up too quickly, it will bubble out of your bloodstream. That's called the bends. And so if you were on these SSRIs and you want to get off of them, you got to do it through a very, very slow decompression process. If you don't, it's been documented over and over again. People committing suicide, or murder-suicide, that sort of thing. And now we see this with this shooter in Dayton. But that is the story that is never talked about. Outside of InfoWars, outside of Free Thought Project, this is their article here, nobody ever talks about that. Not in the mainstream press. Why would that be? Well, there's some obvious reasons for that. As I point out, surprise, the Dayton mass shooter autopsy reveals antidepressants in his system, despite the near constant link between mass shooters and psychiatric medications. PolitiFact wants you to think that it's stupid to even question it. See, if you talk about the fact that we need to have guns as a deterrent to tyranny, oh, you're crazy. You're dangerous, as a matter of fact. And if you say that there is any link, in spite of the reams of evidence and documented cases linking SSRIs, then you are to be ridiculed. No. We want to make it about the political agendas. We want to make it about video games. We want to make it about something. Don't talk the guns. Don't talk about SSRIs. Don't talk about the psychiatric profession and the way that they push drugs. As a matter of fact, the way we're going to solve this is we're going to add more psychiatrists. We're going to fund a federal bureaucracy that'll, we'll give billions of dollars to the states to hire people who will diagnose red-flagged individuals and presumably prescribe antidepressants for them. What could possibly go wrong? See, it will escalate this whole problem, and that will be yet another excuse to take the guns. You can think of the SSRIs not just as mass murder suicide pills, but you can think of them as a gateway drug to gun control. That's what it really has become. As I point out, since the shootings in Dayton and El Paso, PolitiFact has made it its mission to, quote-unquote, fact-check anyone, or simply just label them as a kook, for simply pointing out the fact that many of the mass shooters are on these meds. Nearly all of them, as a matter of fact. They have gone so far as to say that questioning the role of psychiatric medications in mass shootings is, quote-unquote, dubious. And yet, here's some of the people, the famous mass shooters that have been on SSRIs. David Katz, Stephen Paddock, Omar Mateen, Gavin Long, Dylan Roof, Eric Harris, Dylan Klebold, James Holmes, Nicholas Cruz. Oh, yeah, you know, the Parkland shooting, where all this red flag stuff began. Like I said, it is a gateway drug to gun control. They were all taking prescription drugs that altered their state of mind. They were all taking these SSRIs that have a long history of triggering people if there is a change at all in the medication. If they take a little bit less, if they take a little bit more, it can trigger a suicide murder event. There have been 150 studies in 17 countries on antidepressant-induced side effects. But don't tell that to PolitiFact. Those are inconvenient facts for somebody who is political. Despite this deadly laundry list of potential reactions, right, Free Thought Project, the use of these medications has skyrocketed by 400% since 1988. Coincidentally, as antidepressant use went up, so did mass shootings. So you have a wealth of events that were documented. Somebody changed the medication, murder, suicide, so forth. And then you have a trend that goes up as the use of these drugs go up. But don't pay attention to either of those facts, right? As the Citizens Commission on Human Rights notes, before the 1980s, mass shootings and acts of senseless violence were relatively unheard of. Prozac, the most well-known SSRI, and those are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressants. Prozac was not yet on the market. When Prozac did arrive, it was marketed as a panacea for depression, which resulted in huge profits for Eli Lilly. As they point out, Eli Lilly subsequently paid secret settlements to survivors after a man on Prozac went on a shooting rampage in 1989, because those are the early days, right? Now we just have the media to sweep that under the carpet. And you probably didn't hear about this particular case. Joseph T. Westbecker, 47, carried out a mass shooting in which he shot 20 workers at Standard Gravure Corporation in Kentucky, September 1989. 8 of the victims were fatally wounded and so forth, and Eli Lilly paid out a big settlement for that. Side effects such as obsession with suicide and dangerously violent behavior. Very common, according to the American Journal of Psychiatry. And yet, the prescription rate for this has gone up. The use of it has gone up by 400%. It took a very long time for them to talk about the opioid epidemic, didn't it? What about the SSRI epidemic? Oh, it suits their purpose, doesn't it? It gives them a reason for gun control. Do you think that this is going to be talked about by the major media corporations? No. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. When we look at what's going on with SSRI drugs, and why are we not hearing about this? Here's why we're not hearing about it. Free Thought Project pointed out in their article that with the exception of CBS, every major media outlet in the United States shares at least one board member with at least one pharmaceutical company. Think about that. ABC, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they've all got board members that are also on the boards of major pharmaceutical companies. And it turns out to be one of their major sponsors as well. That's why they're fighting tooth and nail to keep President Trump's Health and Human Services from requiring that they tell people how much the big pharmaceutical drugs and the Ask Your Doctor commercials actually cost. A lot of them cost $15,000, $16,000 per month. This is the major sponsor of the news. That's why the news is not going to blow the whistle on this. And it really has become a gateway drug for gun control. Over and over again, we see this. Here's some of the other old stories going back to the 1980s, the 1990s. And again, as we've seen the frequency of these shootings going up, we have seen since the late 1980s, we have seen that they have increased the amount of prescription drugs for these antidepressants, these serotonin uptake inhibitors. That's gone up by 400%. It's very well documented. As a matter of fact, we've got a lot of lawsuits. I talked about the one lawsuit where they paid people secret settlements. So we don't know how much money they actually paid to the people. The survivors of the shooting filed a lawsuit against Eli Lilly, arguing that it had known about the propensity of Prozac to cause violent outbursts and suicidal tendencies. The company convinced the victims to agree to secret settlements outside of court, so we don't know. But they're not the only ones producing these SSRIs. GlaxoSmithKline paid $6.5 million to the family of a man who murdered 3 family members hours after taking Paxil in 1998. Donald Schell was his name, 60 years old, prescribed the antidepressant Paxil to treat depression in Wyoming in February 1998. Within hours of the first dosage, he burst into a fit of rage, fatally shot his wife. So probably because, as I said, it's the change. They might have given him a dosage that was, the first time he had taken it. They didn't ramp it up slowly. And that's the key thing. If you or any of your family members are on SSRIs, you've got to get off of this very, very, very slowly. Any change, increasing or decreasing, is very, very dangerous. Can trigger murder or suicide. He shot and killed himself after he killed the family members. The remaining family members filed a wrongful death lawsuit, and they won. They were given $6.4 million. GlaxoSmithKline also paid $3 million to the widow of a man who committed suicide after taking Paxil in 2010. He jumped in front of a Chicago Transit Authority train. His widow said, "This for me was not about the money. This has always been about awareness to a health issue. And the public needs to be aware of this." But you're not going to hear it from the big media, right? As a matter of fact, we've seen Sean Hannity on Fox News last year blatantly cutting off a reporter who dared to mention that Nicholas Cruz's situation, he had antidepressants as part of that. As soon as he mentioned that, bingo, you're gone. You're talking about my sponsor now. Same thing happened with Alex Jones on CNN. That very contentious interview that he had about gun control with Piers Morgan at the time. And as soon as, it was very contentious, but they were going back and forth. But as soon as Alex Jones mentioned SSRIs, boom, he was gone. Show him out of the building. Sean Hannity does the same thing for Fox News. Why? That's their major sponsor. And the government likes that as well because it gives them the ability to get everybody afraid of what's going on. Everybody is talking about what is the political agenda of this guy, and those things do play into it. But it is really the SSRIs at the base of this. You want to talk about the moral decay of this country? That's a factor. You want to talk about the political division? That is a factor. But there is a big factor of SSRIs, and that's why when we look at these red flag gun laws, and we look at what Lindsey Graham is pushing on President Trump, and it looks like President Trump may be biting on this, the idea that we're going to have red flag gun laws that are going to evaluate people's mental health, and then we're going to prescribe psychiatric treatment for them. We'll take the guns. Well, you know what? That isn't going to do it. If somebody is dangerous, do the due process first and put the dangerous person away because, as this Dayton shooter said before this, brick, knife, gun. They can use anything. They can use a bomb. They can use a car. They can use any kind of a weapon. The person is dangerous, but they're telling us the gun is dangerous because they want to confiscate guns. This is beyond the unconstitutional restrictions on acquiring firearms. This is about taking what people already have. And we need to be aware of that. Now, as we look at, I want to jump to Epstein because we've got some updates on Jeffrey Epstein that I think are very interesting. The reports that came out talking about the preferential treatment that he got, the Florida newspaper talking about the fact that he is buying thousands of dollars worth of purchases, including female undergarments so small that they wouldn't fit an average-size adult woman. Well, did he have children in the jail cell with him? Well, the answer is he wasn't in the jail cell that much. Surprisingly, he had been given a sweetheart deal on work release when he was in jail in Florida. He had a 6-day-a-week work release. Eventually, they extended it to 7 days a week. The hours outside the cell were extended from 12 to 16 hours outside of the jail cell. So he's just coming in to sleep. This guy had basically been given a deal like Otis, the town drunk, in Andy Griffith. Basically just give him the keys and he lets himself in and sleeps on the cot, and then the next day he walks out and does whatever he wishes. When you look at this type of situation, do you really think that he would commit suicide? Why would, after the sweetheart deal that he got, where Ken Starr, his lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, his lawyer, worked with the prosecutor, Alex Acosta, and all these people who are tied in, oh, yeah, I was told to lay off of him because he's connected to intelligence agencies. When you look at that and you look at the sweetheart deal that he got, you look at the preferential treatment that he got while he was in jail, why would you expect that he would be so afraid of life in prison that he would commit suicide? And he told his lawyer the day before, hey, I'll see you the next day. You know, no problem, said his lawyers. They're not buying the suicide thing. I think that he thought he could get away with it. Look at what he got away with all of his life, as I tweeted out before. They never investigated his life. They never investigated his finances. They're not going to investigate his death. But I don't think he was concerned about that either. You know, he had an unlocked cell door. He had almost unlimited access to TV. He had it better than Otis and Mayberry. I don't think Otis didn't have a television set. And Otis wasn't ordering panties for little girls. He was sleeping it off every night like Jeffrey Epstein was. But he had a lot better conditions than pretty much anybody could imagine. One of the things that's absolutely amazing is that he was referred to by the sheriff's department. They referred to him as our client. And when they would escort him to the various places, they were required to wear suits, you know, because he doesn't want somebody, you know, he doesn't want to look like he's in custody or something, you know, no police uniforms, please. Put on some civilian suits. You guys need to dress it up here a little bit, right? And then he donated a fantastic amount of money to that sheriff's department as well. Nothing to see here, right? Just move on. Well, we're going to talk about the other side of it, the side that directly affects you. You may not have any contact with Epstein or these other people, but you may have contact in a way that you don't realize. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We have an excellent report by Greg Reese. I'm not going to have time to play it today. Perhaps I'll play it tomorrow. Congressional testimony from the Clinton era reveals pedophile blackmail network. Yeah, this has always been a part of it. But it is interesting because what Greg showed in his report, in 1995, President Clinton had an advisory committee on human radiation experimentation. It included testimony before Congress from child victims involved in the experiment. They claimed that they were tortured, that they were kept in cages. Oh, yes, really kept in cages this time. This is not the overblown rhetoric of the left. Talking about children who are separated from adults so they can determine whether or not they really are their parents, and they find out in well over a third of the cases that they aren't related to these people. No, they were tortured, kept in cages, kids, sexually used to sexually blackmail powerful politicians when they were only 9 years old. This is testimony. You can still find this in the National Security Archive. And Greg shows in this report that you can see at InfoWars the testimony, some of the video footage that was there. From the archives, some C-SPAN archives and so forth. This has always been a part of this. This is one of the reasons why they would cherry pick people like Dennis Hastert, a known pedophile, wrestling coach, groom him, make him a congressman, then make him the longest serving Speaker of the House. This is why, quite frankly, I think we still haven't seen Ghislaine Maxwell arrested. She figures prominently in all these accusations, these allegations. Why was she never arrested? Why is she, as a matter of fact, still at large? Well, it turns out that her father, Robert Maxwell, he was a Labour MP in the UK. He also was a media tycoon. And he was also a Mossad agent. He was given a state funeral in Jerusalem after he drowned, accidentally falling off of his yacht, which he named after his daughter, who was Jeffrey Epstein's partner in crime and who is still at large. The name of the yacht was the Lady Ghislaine. So, yeah, this stuff gets more and more interesting, doesn't it? As I pointed out, he was given very liberal access to the outside. He would have initially 12 hours a day for 6 days a week. Eventually, it grew to 16 hours. He could be outside of his jail cell, and it was every day of the week, 7 days a week. He had deputies that accompanied him as part of his work release. He was allowed to go to his own office and everything. The deputies were required to wear suits while they accompanied him. He, in turn, reciprocated, or maybe it was a quid pro quo. He gave the nonprofit organization the sheriff's office had there for their police department. He paid them $128,000. And it's kind of interesting that out of 21 inmates that were there for sex offenses, he was the only one who was allowed outside on a work release program. He had his own key. You know, like I said, Otis from the Andy Griffith Show. He would just, you know, come back to the jail cell at night and sleep it off, whatever it was that he was doing with those tiny panties that he was ordering online and the places that we would go during the day. And then we see this article over the weekend, a $100,000 cement mixer that was express shipped to his pedo island. Very expensive to do that. This is a very, very big machine. This is not like the cement mixer that you and I get down at Home Depot. This is a $100,000 cement mixer. This is the Jimmy Hoffa model, folks. If you really got something you got to literally cover up, this is the cement mixer you want. And he had that express shipped to him at great expense 21 days before Julie Brown's expose was published in the Miami Herald, 23 days before he allegedly began to try to pay off witnesses. Nothing to see here, right? Just move along. Well, let me tell you something. You know, we've been saying for a long time, the elites are pretty much for the most part engaged in these pedophile networks. They use this to blackmail people and so forth. But if you don't understand how this agenda, these elite people who are controlling the educational establishment, they want your children in every way possible. And they're getting them, aren't they? As a society, we foolishly turn over our children to institutions that are directed from Washington. They have a global agenda, quite frankly. The agenda, the sexualizing agenda, is the same across the world. The Common Core isn't just a Common Core coming from Washington. It is a Common Core for the world, and it is a Common Core of sexualization of children. There's an article from the World Tribune. Influential website promoting adult sex with young teens has powerful corporate backers. This is a website in the UK. It's called Pink News. Oh, yeah, very appropriate, right? Featured a deeply disturbing video this week about a relationship that began when an adult male was 49 years old with an adolescent boy who was 16. The person said, a lot of people just assume that we're father and son. And they point out that this sickening tweet and the video itself were later deleted after a backlash, but it's not the first time that this website, Pink News, has pushed the sexualization of young teens. There was a controversial 2013 opinion piece by veteran UK homosexual activist Peter Tatchell. He urged the age of consent for homosexuals in Britain be lowered to 14. And this isn't the first time. We saw the interview with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2003, the guy came out with, saying that Epstein had said that the idea of consensual sex, the idea that there is an age at which point children cannot consent to sex of any kind, heterosexual, homosexual, you name it. He said that's a cultural aberration. Alan Dershowitz's lawyer said the same thing. We got to get over this idea. This is silly. And so this is what they said, well, we need to lower this to 14, but it's not just that. He has also celebrated individuals who have pushed for removing it completely. As a matter of fact, the same guy who wrote this back in 1998, Tatchell, also wrote a glowing obituary for a man that they described on Raw magazine as a good friend of his, a homosexual activist named Ian Dunn. He hailed Dunn as a pioneer for lesbian and gay human rights. What he didn't mention was that he was a co-founder of a group called the Pedophile Exchange Network, or Exchange, rather, Pedophile Information Exchange. In a 1997 letter he wrote to The Guardian, he defended academic studies that seek to challenge the assumption that all sex involving children and adults is abusive. He said, the research is courageous. This is where these people are going. This is where they've always been going. And they've got big corporate sponsors behind Pink News. Uber is a big corporate sponsor. So is Citibank. So is Virgin Money, part of Richard Branson's Virgin corporate empire. And then we see in Australia, we got libraries promoting a transgender teen book that describes a 6-year-old liking oral sex. This book is Beyond Magenta. A transgender teen speaks out. This has always been the agenda. This is why I said, if you can sell the idea, and they're selling it in the libraries, they're selling it with the drag queen story hours, they're selling it with the books that they have in the library like this one. If you can sell that idea that children can make that decision, that the parents should not be involved, this is all part of the children's rights movement. The children's rights movement has always been in juxtaposition to parental rights, and they're using the children's rights idea to exclude parents from any discussion, whether it is began with abortion, then it goes to transgenderism, now it goes to consensual sex. If your child can decide that they are a different gender when they're 4, 5, 6 years old, then of course they are mature enough to decide whether or not they're going to have consensual sex. That's why they're pushing transgenderism so much. This is where Jeffrey Pedophile meets your family. You know, you talk about Epstein all this time. You talk about all the corruption of the political elites and the intelligence communities and the CIA and the Mossad and so forth. But understand that Epstein is at your school working with your kids. And if you don't understand that, you are beyond foolish that you allow this stuff to continue to happen. Get your kids out of the school and then stop this before they destroy the rest of society. Folks, we got just a little bit of time here. Just want to remind you again, we have a sale of some of our most popular items that have not been exhausted at the moment. We've now been able to get Ultimate Krill Oil back in stock. The products that we sell, the natural products that we sell, folks, that's the only thing that pays for this show and everything else that we do here at InfoWars. That's the only way that we make money. The products that you buy, your direct support, we really do thank you for supporting us over the last year. We now have many products 50 to 60% off still at InfoWarsStore.com. Things like Knockout, Bodies, our all-natural anti-inflammatory agent, Brain Force Plus, all those 50% off. Some items 60% off. InfoWarsStore.com. That's it for today's broadcast. Thank you for joining us.